By 1979, Rhodesia was bleeding from every seam. 14 years of insurgency, 2 liberation armies operating from 2 hostile borders, and an economy strangled by international sanctions had reduced the country's fighting strength to a hard core of professionals rotated to the edge of collapse. ZANLA, the Zimbabwe African National Liberation Army, the military wing of Robert Mugabe ZANU, was operating from bases inside Frelimo-controlled Mozambique, sending trained cadres across the eastern border to attack farms, mission stations, and Rhodesian security force patrols. The Rhodesian answer, refined through a decade of external raids, was the Fire Force doctrine coupled with cross-border strikes by the Selous Scouts, the Rhodesian Light Infantry, and above all, the SAS. Under Lieutenant Colonel Garth Barrett, C Squadron had become one of the most experienced special forces units in the world. Operation Dingo at Chimgo in 1977, Operation Snoopy, Operation Uric at Mapai just weeks before Mavonde, where the SAS and Rhodesian Light Infantry had run into hardened Frelimo defenses backed by T-55s and lost men they could not replace. Uric had shaken the Rhodesian High Command. Frelimo was no longer a bystander. Soviet-supplied anti-aircraft guns, ZSU-23-2s, and heavy machine guns were being positioned around ZANLA base complexes deep inside Manica province. Every raid was more expensive than the last, and the intelligence coming out of the Combined Operations Headquarters, COMOPS, was blunt. The guerrilla infrastructure at Mavonde was preparing a major thrust into the Umtali corridor. The base itself sat roughly 100 kilometers east of the border, a cluster of huts, trench systems, and cache points hidden inside a patch of Miombo woodland at the base of a low ridge. Aerial reconnaissance flown by the Rhodesian Air Force's Canberra and Lynx aircraft placed at least 200 armed ZANLA fighters in the camp, with more filtering in from the north each night. Anti-aircraft positions had been photographed on the high ground. Any conventional heliborne assault would fly into mass 12.7 and 14.5 fire before the first stick even touched the LZ. COMOPS handed the target to C Squadron, and the officer commanding the raid was ordered to solve a problem the planners in Salisbury could not. How do you break 200 entrenched men with less than a platoon of your own, and get everyone home before Mozambique's regular army closes the trap? The original scheme of maneuver was orthodox SAS doctrine. A 4-troop assault, roughly 48 men, would be inserted by Rhodesian Air Force helicopters, the venerable Alouette III cars and G-cars flown by 7 Squadron, at a landing zone west of the base, then sweep east through the guerrilla positions under the cover of aerial strikes from Hunter FGA-9s and Canberra bombers of 5 Squadron. But 2 things broke that plan before it started. First, the Alouette lift was cut. Uric had chewed up airframes and pilots. Fuel bladders had to be prepositioned. Only 3 helicopters could be committed to the initial insertion, which meant the assault force was cut from 4 troops to 2, around 32 men, plus a small mortar detachment. Second, and this is the part the after-action reports handle carefully, the assault commander refused the ingress route. Every previous raid on this axis had come in from the west, along the natural approach. ZANLA's command element, trained by Cuban and East German advisors, had wired that approach for defense. Their fighting trenches, their Claymore equivalents, their pre-registered mortar tables all faced west. The commander walked into the pre-mission briefing at the New Sarum forward staging point, looked at the terrain model, and told his squadron leader that going in from the west was going to get his men killed for nothing. He wanted the ridge. The high ground east of the camp, the very feature ZANLA had never fortified because no sane raider would insert on the far side of the target, deeper into Mozambique, with the border and every possible extraction route behind 200 armed guerrillas. But that was exactly the point. Insert on the ridge at last light. Move down the slope in darkness. Hit the base from the rear at first gray light, when the sentries were watching the wrong direction and the anti-aircraft crews on the western heights could not depress their weapons to engage a threat behind them. Salisbury pushed back. The plan violated every rule about escape routes. If the assault stalled, the squadron would be trapped between the base and the interior of Mozambique. If Frelimo reinforcements arrived from Chimyo, there was no way home. The commander's answer, recorded almost word for word by men who were in the tent, was that if the assault stalled, escape routes would not matter. The order was approved. If this is landing, save this video. You will want to come back to this one. Sunset, day 1. 3 Alouettes lifted from the forward air base, low and fast, hugging the escarpment. They dropped the assault force in 2 lifts on a bald patch of the ridge 2 kilometers behind the ZANLA camp. Last helicopter cleared the LZ in fading light. The SAS troopers, carrying FNFALs, RPD light machine guns, 16 patrol mortars, and enough ammunition to fight for 6 hours, began the descent. They moved by compass and dead reckoning through the night, silent, spread out, communicating only by hand signal and touch. By 4:30, the lead pair had cleared the tree line and were lying in the elephant grass 50 meters from the eastern edge of the base. They could hear the guerrillas. Cooking fires, a radio playing Radio Maputo, the metallic clunk of a sentry lighting a cigarette on the perimeter berm. At 5:10, with the first gray line of dawn over the ridge, the mortar detachment on the high ground behind them opened up. 6 bombs walked in from the far side of the camp, hitting the western trench line, the trench line facing the direction ZANLA expected an attack to come from. And the ZANLA garrison did exactly what the commander had bet they would do. They ran west into the trenches and turned their weapons toward the empty tree line where their attackers were not. Then the SAS assault line came out of the elephant grass behind them. What happened over the next 40 minutes at Mavonde was not a battle in the conventional sense. It was a sweep of men caught in their own defensive geometry, facing the wrong direction, with SAS troopers moving through them in extended line from a direction their command post had never wargamed. The forward pair took the eastern sentries with silenced pistols. The main assault line hit the accommodation huts in pairs, one man kicking the grass door, the second placing rapid double taps on anyone rising from a sleeping mat. RPD gunners on the flanks took the diagonal lanes between huts, firing tracer to mark targets for the FN riflemen. The 60 mortars on the ridge shifted from the western trenches to the central parade area, dropping high explosive on the section commanders trying to rally the guerrillas. Within the first 10 minutes, the ZANLA fire discipline collapsed. The section commanders and the political commissar, the men whose job was to hold a base like this together under attack, were either dead or wounded. What remained was 200 men, most of them young, most of them with basic AKM training and 6 months in a training camp in Tanzania, facing 32 professionals who had been doing this for a decade. But here is what the standard accounts leave out. At roughly 5:45, 20 minutes into the assault, the SAS commander made his second decision, the one veterans still argue about. A group of perhaps 40 ZANLA had broken contact eastward up the ridge line the SAS had come down. They were running for the empty flank. If they made the tree line, they would circle back and hit the mortar position on the ridge, the only heavy weapons the raiders had, and the position guarding the extraction LZ. The commander had 2 choices. Detach a fire team to chase them, weakening the assault line as it entered the trench system, or let them go, secure the base, and risk losing the mortars and the LZ. He ordered the assault to press through. He gambled that the mortar section, 4 men, could hold the ridge alone. For nearly 30 minutes, those 4 men fought a running engagement across the reverse slope of the ridge, using the mortar in the direct lay roll, barrel horizontal, firing point blank until the last of the ZANLA counterattack broke and scattered into the bush. The mortar sergeant would later be recommended for a decoration for that action. 2 of his men were wounded. The mortar tube was hot enough to burn skin. The LZ held. Down in the base, the assault line reached the western trenches, the trenches ZANLA had built to stop an attack from the west, now full of ZANLA facing west, unable to turn around fast enough in a firing position designed to shoot in only one direction. The Rhodesians rolled up the trench system from the flank, moving grenade by grenade, bay by bay. By 6:20, the shooting had died to isolated bursts. By 700, the base was silent. Rhodesian count on the ground, cross-referenced against later intelligence, approximately 212 ZANLA killed, 6 wounded taken prisoner for interrogation. Rhodesian SAS casualties, 2 wounded, none killed. But that was only the opening move. What happened next inside Rhodesian Comops defied every rule of political warfare. The immediate tactical aftermath of Mavonde was almost impossible to publicly celebrate. Rhodesia was, by September 1979, effectively a country in negotiation. Lord Carrington had convened the Lancaster House Conference in London, and every external raid launched by Salisbury was another political weight on the scale against the Muzorewa government. The Rhodesian Foreign Ministry did not want Mavonde in the newspapers. Frelimo did not want Mavonde in the newspapers. Even ZANU-PF, for very different reasons, buried the scale of the losses inside internal party documents that would not surface for years. That silence is why Mavonde is a footnote today. Chimyo is famous. Dingo is famous. The Green Leader raids on Zambia are famous. Mavonde, arguably one of the most tactically perfect small unit operations of the entire Bush War, sits in the shadows because both sides had reasons to keep it quiet. Militarily, the impact was immediate. ZANLA push into the Umtali corridor did not happen in October or November. The cadres who were supposed to lead it were dead in a Mozambican camp. Intelligence recovered from the base, training rosters, radio codes, cache locations across 3 provinces, allowed the SAS scouts and the Rhodesian African rifles to run a series of follow-up operations that gutted ZANLA's forward infrastructure in the final weeks of the war. Strategically, the picture is more complicated. Mavonde did not save Rhodesia. Nothing was going to save Rhodesia in September 1979. The demographic math, the sanctions regime, the collapse of white immigration, the sheer scale of ZANLA and ZIPRA recruitment, the arithmetic of the war had turned 3 years earlier and was never going to turn back. Mavonde bought weeks, not victory. But doctrinally, Mavonde is still studied. Not in Salisbury. Salisbury does not exist anymore in the sense the men of C Squadron would recognize. It is studied at Hereford, at Apagou, at Fort Bragg, at Fort Benning. It is studied because it demonstrated something small unit warfare has proven again and again since, that a professional assault force, willing to insert on the wrong side of the target and accept the risk of a closed escape route, can achieve a 5, 10, or 20-to-1 exchange ratio against a fixed enemy who has planned for the obvious approach. And it is studied because of the commander's choice on the ridge, the decision to press through and let the LZ defend itself. Some officers who have written about Mavonde argue that he risked the entire squadron on the courage of 4 men. Others argue that any hesitation at that moment would have given the ZANLA garrison the 90 seconds it needed to reorganize inside the trench system, and 32 men in the open would have been cut apart. The debate has never been settled because both sides can point to what did not happen. That is the ghost that haunts every commander's decision under fire. The proof of the road not taken. Drop it in the comments. Was the commander right to press the assault and let the mortar section fight alone, or should he have detached men to chase the breakout? Which call would you have made? CTA 1213 Min. If you want more like this, small unit actions, forgotten operations, the raids that shape the doctrines every modern special forces regiment now uses, subscribe and hit the bell icon. New battle every Wednesday. Stories the history books skipped are the ones we live on. Outro 1315 Min. There is a line from one of the Rhodesian SAS troopers who was on the ridge that morning, given to Historian decades later. He said that the strangest thing about Mavonde was not the fight. It was the walk back to the extraction LZ afterward, past the huts, past the trenches, past 200 men who 2 hours earlier had been planning their own war. And the total silence. That is the lesson of Mavonde. Small units correctly employed do not just win engagements, they erase the men who plan the next engagement. Every general who has ever fought an insurgency, from Kitchener in South Africa to Petraeus in Iraq, has run into that same arithmetic and made his peace with it in his own way. The war ended less than 3 months later. Rhodesia became Zimbabwe. The men of C Squadron, 1 SAS regiment, were scattered across 3 continents within a year, some to South Africa, some to the private military circuits of the 1980s, some quietly home to farms that were no longer theirs. The regiment itself was disbanded on December 31st, 1980. The colors were laid up. The base at Mavonde was abandoned by ZANLA within weeks of the raid and reclaimed by the Miombo bush. If this one hit my video on Operation Dingo, the Rhodesian SAS raid on Chimyo in 1977, the largest external operation of the Bush War and the one that gave the men of Mavonde the playbook they used, will blow your mind. It is next on the list. Stay with me. In September 1979, 32 men of C Squadron, 1st Rhodesian SAS Regiment, inserted on the wrong side of a ZANLA staging base at Mavonde, deep inside Mozambique, and destroyed a garrison of over 200 guerrillas at the cost of 2 wounded and no dead. This is the story of the raid, the commander's choice to attack from an impossible direction, the 4 mortar men who held the extraction ridge alone, and the reason the operation was buried by both sides for decades. Featuring Lieutenant Colonel Garth Barrett, C Squadron 1 SAS Regiment, Rhodesian Air Force 7 Squadron and 5 Squadron, ZANLA, Frelimo, and the political context of the Lancaster House Conference. Timestamps 00, 00 the impossible choice 00, 45 the squeeze on Rhodesia 03, 00 the broken plan and the ridge 06, 00 the killing ground 09, 00 the legacy of Mavonde 12, 00 the debate that never ended 13, 00 what Mavonde teaches us. Subscribe and hit the bell. New battle every Wednesday. Militar History Special Forces, Rhodesian SAS Bush War Cold War.